Welcome to another episode of the Pedophile Huntress. We are each here tonight with a common goal, that you be encouraged in heart and united in love. We're here to share our stories because the world tells us we're not supposed to share, that we're supposed to stay quiet, that these things are matters of families and shouldn't be shared. Do you know why the world wants us to stay quiet? Because this is a true genocide. It's taking millions and millions of lives, and not very many people want to do very much about it. When Jesus was here, John 18 tells us that he said, I am not an earthly king. If I were, my followers would have fought when I was arrested by the Jewish leaders. But my kingdom is not of this world. Then you have to ask the question, if this isn't God's kingdom, whose kingdom is the world? First John gives us an answer, and there's many other answers, but First John 5:19 says, we know that we are children of God and that the whole world is under the control of the evil one. So if lives are being destroyed through this crime, and this crime has been going on for centuries, and it really somewhat goes unnoticed under the guise of stigma and, hush, you can be sure that this isn't God that's telling you to be quiet.
Mm-hmm.
Tonight's discussion, we're going to talk about defining love in a family of incest. And we're also going to be talking about false memories. Is that a thing? So I want to start with this article that Carol sent in from The Atlantic. And I think with me tonight is Emily again. Emily, welcome. Thank you so much.
Hello.
I think you have also had the opportunity to read this article, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so
I
this
did.
this article is crazy. This article came out March 18th, 2024. The title of the article is DNA Tests Are Uncovering the True Prevalence of Incest. And it says that people are discovering the truth about their biological parents with DNA and learning that incest is far more common than people think. And it goes on to tell the story of this man who was adopted in 1973, and the adoptive family keeps this newspaper clippings, and
Mm-hmm.
sometimes he asked to see the newspaper clippings, and the headlines were mother deserts son, flees from hospital. His mother was 14, excuse me, the,
14.
the mother in question was
Mm-hmm.
14, and she disappeared. So through DNA analysis, they find out that it's such a close match that it had to be his father was either her brother or her father. And the article is fascinating because it says in 1975, around the time of Steve's birth, a psychiatric textbook put the frequency of incest at 1 in a million. After
Mm-hmm.
DNA testing came out, this article says that now after this research database, they put it at 1 in 7,000 people. And if you think about that, we have 7.951 billion people on this planet. Can you imagine, Emily, how many? Because again, the statistics aren't right because 1 in 9 report. So the
Mm-hmm.
underreporting, this tells you this is true genocide. When we talk about this, because I've talked to people all the time coming through this, and they are fighting for their lives. They're
Mm-hmm.
fighting to
Mm-hmm.
stay with their sanity. They're fighting, to stay in this. And so I love to give this kind of story because it's so much more prevalent than research tells us, because research isn't right. Because this is why I started tonight with, you guys, the reason you're being quiet is because the prince of the power of this air wants you to be quiet. And
Mm-hmm.
here's Carol. Carol is going to join us right now. But Emily,
Yay.
tell us about that. And then we'll welcome her in just a minute. Tell me what you feel about those when you hear about that 1 in a million. But when DNA testing comes around, now they say 1 in 7,000. It's crazy.
Yeah. Yeah. And based on what I remember from the article, that was a statistic in the UK, like the UK
Yes.
scientist. What I think it shows is society is suffering. Like there's so much silent suffering going on.
Yes.
And there's so much pain. I mean, I know from my experience, the pain that I've had and that I have gone through alone. And if it's that prevalent, that means that there are millions of others that are going through that pain. And so it becomes a societal wound that is not being cared for. And it's tragic. That's what I
Wow.
think.
That, you know
Mhm.
what, a societal wound. It's so true. And we're going to welcome Carol now. Carol, we have just started with your the statistics that were in the article that you sent, and it's
Oh,
just
okay.
fascinating. And
Great.
so Emily was sharing with us about what she thought, and I think it's so true that the silent suffering and the societal wound it is. And we started the podcast tonight with, why is everybody so silent, right? Yeah, I mean, it's for
Yes.
generations and generations, decades, centuries, you guys, centuries from the beginning of time.
Mhm.
And this is something that the society's not going to help us with this. Don't you agree,
Mm-mm.
Carol? That I don't see society stepping up and saying, "Hey, everybody that came from incest,
No.
stand up and come here. We want to help you." Tell me, how
Right.
come you think they will or will not help us?
I don't think I don't think society will help us until it becomes talked about much more often. I mean, I think one of the most important things we can do is that it's being talked about and defined within our social circles, within our families, as awkward as that can be. And
Mhm.
Mhm.
also remember too, it's around the world. It's all over the
Exactly.
world. This is
Yep.
happening in
Oh,
every culture.
yes, I love
Yeah,
that. It's so, no,
in
keep
every
going.
religious group. Yeah,
Mhm.
it's um it's a huge problem, and possibly the United States is doing better than most, and that's not
Mhm.
very good.
Right. And yet, an article that I read, they said that America is not doing well facing this problem, and that
Mhm.
we have one of the biggest, you guys, child sex trafficking problems in the
Mm.
world is in
Mm.
America. And
Mhm.
so, I was listening to this podcast today, and they were talking about trafficking children. And one of the things they said, that in our government, because this was a person who came out of our government, and they said these people have perversions. They're bent, they're twisted. He said, I've worked
Mm.
around it. This is not just stories I've heard about. I worked with these people. And so I don't really know. I think it's story by story, person by person, where we're going to just continue to do this and tell people that it's
Mhm.
okay to come out, because again, like you said, this is a world problem. I follow a lot of people on my blog, and this one woman writes about the India problem. And in India, there's so much prevalence
Mhm.
of rape and child sexual crimes and that sort of thing. So, what else did you guys take from the article as you read it? It was a fascinating article to me, and it was sad to me when he found out that he was a product of incest and that his
Mhm.
mother couldn't overcome the shame, even though he
Mhm.
held a great deal of compassion for her, right?
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah, and they're starting to form support groups over this
Mhm.
too for people
Yes.
that
Mhm.
have found this out, and it's got to be horrifying, to find that out, or yeah, really
Mhm.
horrifying. So,
Yeah,
Right.
I thought it was wonderful the way that the couple together really took it on, and they're supporting
Yes.
people and creating a network through Facebook
Yes.
and through what they're doing with telephone calls. And I think it's another example of their own personal
Mhm.
willingness to enter their own story
yeah.
that then helps them heal and be able to help others. And that I have encountered individuals who, well, one individual that I can remember that found out that she was a child born through incest, and
Mhm.
she was in college at the time, and it was very, very difficult for her, very difficult.
Mhm.
And she was open about it, and her peers were kind. And I think that that's a hopeful thing
Mhm.
because
Yes.
her generation was able to acknowledge that and hold that, and she was still their friend. And it wasn't like they were not, they still cared for her and supported her and
Right,
listened
because
to her,
again, it's
all
not the
that.
child's
Mhm.
stigma, but I thought it was really
Right.
important that the article said that these DNA companies, 23andMe and the other one, they will not tell you if it's an incest match. You
Mm.
actually have to kind of dig deeper. And so again, it perpetuates this kind of, and probably they don't want any liability, but I guess I just want to say out loud
Mm-hmm.
that to watch for that, because these people took the next step to actually dive into that when it was found that, the DNA match was so close. They actually won't identify that as an incestuous match,
Mm-hmm.
which,
That's interesting.
yeah, it is
Yeah.
interesting. I thought that
Mhm.
was interesting as well, because again, we started this with the world is not going to tell you it's okay to tell your story. It's there, it's just not
Right.
going to, because
No.
the drivers of this world are just dark forces. And I'm going to believe that till I leave this planet. But we can do what we can do, every story at a time. But he does find his mom, and I want you guys to talk a little bit because I know that you understand the mother. She
Mm-hmm.
had to hide in shame, right? So in the story, the article talks about him reaching out to his mother, and he sends the letter certified mail. The mom accepts the letter, and he gets this certified green card back that we're all familiar with. And he
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
holds the card and he says, "My mother actually touched this card. It was very important
Mm-hmm.
to him."
Yeah.
And yet, to this day, she's never
Mm-hmm.
reached out and contacted him. You
Yeah.
guys talk about we can only identify the way we feel, but wouldn't that be a difficult scenario for her?
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I don't think anyone's going to the adoption agencies and saying, well, here's my child and it's from my father. It's
Right,
like
right.
there, people just don't have that comfort zone. Or even, if you keep the child, I can't imagine as a mother having that conversation of, by
Mhm,
the way,
mhm.
darling, your grandfather is your father
Right.
also.
Your daddy's your
Um,
Mm-hmm.
granddaddy. Yeah. And
yeah, yes,
I've
yes.
actually I've had a woman on the show who she did have her father's son. And she's a
Wow.
remarkable, remarkable woman, but it's been very difficult. And her son was born with some disabilities.
Mm-hmm.
And she's brought him back because he wasn't getting good care. But the amount of strength it takes to live her
Mm-hmm.
life, I honor
Yes.
her, and I give her such
Mm-hmm.
respect for saying, I'm going to love my son. He's my son. But
Yeah.
these things, you guys, they're so, but just because the story's hard, I liked, Emily, what you said about, or it was Carol, someone said, this is a person who stepped into their story and is owning it. And that is indeed how we change our lives, right? By owning
Mm-hmm.
our stories.
Right. Right. And you know what? It's just a fact of life. This has
It
happened
is.
over and over and over. Thousands and thousands of children are
Millions,
born from this. And
right?
and in some ways it may be very good for the topic of incest, that when people start finding out they're actually a
Mhm,
product of this,
mhm.
that could get people talking and starting to bring this out more.
Well, and he says in the article, he said those were some of the worst months of my life because he felt
Mm-hmm.
like this dejected secret, like somebody had just thrown him away.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess if anybody's listening and they've come through that's in your DNA, or just again, these complications that are with incest. We cannot say enough how you're a victim of these crimes. These are
Mm-hmm.
crimes. These are not
Yes.
family secrets. These are crimes, and they need to be
Mhm.
convicted for the crimes they've done, right? So talk a little bit about that, you guys, that we found the courage to come out. I can't say I'm proud of my past, but Carol, it's like what you just said. It is what it is. I can't change
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
it. It is
Mm-hmm.
what it is. I
It
don't
was
hide it.
handed to us on a platter. We had nothing to do with it.
I
And
Exactly.
always feel like it was the hand of cards I was dealt, and
yes.
Yes,
I have to choose what I'm going to do with them.
Hmm.
exactly.
Mm-hmm.
But
Um,
on many
yeah.
ways, we're normal. You know what I mean? Like people don't understand that. We normal. I'm a great cook. Carol's an opera singer.
Yeah.
You have a beautiful career. We do all kinds of things. We are a normal person beside you. And I think that what we're trying to do here as well is normalize, right? Like, yeah, they're horrible crimes, but a lot of
Yes.
people live through horrible crimes. And
Mm-hmm.
sure,
Hmm.
we have residual effects.
Right. Right. I mean, it's owning up to it, and in 2024, I think people are more apt to do that. There's
Yes.
more awareness, which is wonderful. I was going to say, I was reading today about statistics of of abortions with these incestuous
Yeah.
this
Mhm.
incest violence. Anyway, very hard to get the statistics, but they think about 10% of the girls get pregnant.
Mhm.
And of that, maybe 10% get abortions.
Mhm.
So, and they said because girls that are victims of this incest are younger. The typical age I saw was 14, and
Right.
they don't know they're pregnant until
Ugh.
the
Mhm.
second
Mhm.
trimester.
And then
Mhm.
Um,
it's past.
yeah,
Mhm.
it can be past that, which was just kind of interesting to me, and that because of the family dynamics and the power differential with
Mhm.
their father, they're much less um, ready to go try to seek outside help. So,
Mhm.
it's all a big circle,
It
going
is,
on.
right. And again, the numbers are huge because like you just said,
Yeah.
even when they talk about 1 in 7,000, which this article, kind of came to this assumption, which you guys, by the way, is dramatically different than the statistic in 73 that said 1 in 1 million. I mean, and
Mm,
so,
Mhm.
and that number is still, as we know, far off because the
way far off.
secrecy, yeah, the secrecy that's
Mhm.
around this, that if somebody, like I always say, if somebody came into your house and raped you in the middle of the night, are you going to keep that a secret because our privacy is more important? It's
Yeah.
ludicrous to think that. So I don't know
Mhm.
why it is that victims of incest are told, oh, that's a family thing. We don't want to hear about it. I don't
Yeah.
get it.
Mhm. It's all
Mhm.
about protecting the father and
Mhm.
possibly the
The
breadwinner.
mother.
Yeah, and protecting the mother who's married to him,
Mhm.
right? There's all
Mhm.
those dynamics that go into it. Unfortunately, that make it
Right.
very hard for them to speak up.
Right. It's
Mhm.
very true. So, one of the things I wanted to talk about before we talk about love and incestuous family is, Carol, your book is titled First, I Believe You.
Right.
Can you tell me why you titled your book that?
You know, um, I heard that phrase near the end of the writing of the book, and it just really hit me that that's the fundamental um, desire, I think, of any incest victim that comes forward. I think
Mhm.
to believe that person, to believe that child that comes forward and to act on it. And, within my family, it's been very, very difficult with that. People have not believed me. And, we have to change that as a society
We do.
with incest and other forms of sexual abuse. That
Mhm.
the person that speaks on this is telling the truth, very
Right.
difficult truth. It
Mhm.
makes me think also, I'm kind of getting back to that other concept about well, if 9 out of 10 of these babies are kept with these incest victims who become pregnant, who raised the babies, and so
Right.
mom would find out. Mom would probably know who did this, if unless the girl said, oh, I was just raped by an outsider. So it's interesting because it also shows more of the family knows what was going on and they probably
Mhm.
did nothing to the perpetrator.
Oh, I so agree
Mhm.
with that. I so agree with that. Emily, can you tell us where your family stands with that? Do they say first, I believe
With
you? Right.
Yeah,
um
first I believe you, right?
Have they said that
s-
to you? First, I believe you, but then love, let's talk about the rest. Was that your experience?
well, my experience has been really mixed. I've only disclosed my story to in my family to, let's see, 4 or 5 individuals. It's been a quite a mix of responses. Um, None of them said they didn't believe me.
Good.
That's awesome.
So
That's
that's good.
awesome.
Now,
Yes.
not I had then mixed response in terms of their expectations of me as a victim, and their ability to support me or not, their expectations of how I would move forward in the family is mixed. I've had some people who are indifferent or just neutral, like you do what you need to do and we're going to stay out of it, which honestly, that's probably a pretty wise way to proceed for in some ways.
Right.
Um, but then other people who expect me to remain in the family, but I never was not believed,
Oh,
which
that's
Good.
good. Did they ever
Mhm.
ask you why you didn't say anything earlier?
No, because I did say something earlier
Okay, and you did.
to my
That's true.
parents. And I also, my aunt, who is my biological uncle's wife, so like, through marriage, my aunt,
Yeah.
Mhm.
she reminded me of a conversation we had at a family reunion. She and I were in her car. We were driving from one location to another. And I said, I wish our family was more honest. And that flagged something for her. I didn't tell her why.
Mm.
I didn't
Mm.
explain more to her, but I did say that. And she remembered it when I explained everything when I was 41 years old to her for so many years.
Right.
Um, so I think people don't know what to do with the information. They don't know how to stand
Mhm.
up to powerful people. They don't want to make waves. And so it just becomes um, something that people hear, something that could be a red flag, but there's no action taken. Yeah. That in that
Right.
case. Mhm.
Right.
Well, I think it's important to understand too, like with you, Emily, this was an adopted brother,
Mhm.
right?
Right.
And I mean, maybe,
Mhm.
what I've seen in my family relations is each step away from the, blood relatives, it gets easier for them to accept. So, cousins that have been supportive and believe me. My
Mhm.
immediate family, I had nobody,
Mhm.
not one person that believed me. And so I don't know, that may have worked as an advantage to you,
Mhm.
that people perceived it a little
Yeah,
bit
but
differently.
one thing that is tricky is that my mother has been trying to cover up the whole thing forever. And so even when
Mhm.
I was dating my now husband, she kind of pulled him aside and said, well, when Emily was a child, I never knew when she was telling the truth, and she's a
Ah,
storyteller. And she was like
Wow.
priming him
yep.
to try to make him not
It's
believe me.
classic.
So I think the power of the people who are in control of the situation when someone is a victim. And thankfully, my husband was freaked out by her saying that. He didn't take it seriously. He was like, whoa,
Right. Right. Well,
he was
they've got
wise. He
right.
was wise.
These
Mhm.
families have stories they need to cover. And so
Exactly.
one of the things
Yeah.
that's really difficult when you're raped when you're very young is, to me, it reminds me of, like, when you get a sliver in your foot and you can feel that you can feel the injury, and then the sliver
Mhm.
kind of disappears, right? So it's there, you can feel the discomfort, but sometimes you can have a sliver for a long time before it gets infected. And
Mhm.
to me, this is how memories sit in our mind. It's like the
Mhm.
Mhm.
sliver of incest goes in, but we can block it for a long time, right? Like I had somebody ask me the other day on one of my blogs, what, memory works funny. Why do you remember some stuff and not all things? And my
Mhm.
answer to her was, even when we do remember, do we allow it to come out? So a lot of times our families are so secretive that they teach us to block, they teach us to deny. And then guess
Mhm.
what they
Mhm.
do when we're 40 and we say, hey, this is festering, I got to get this sliver out. They're like, you're a liar.
You're a liar. You're right.
But you're the
Right.
ones that taught us how to do this.
Yeah, right.
I mean,
And the brain is extremely powerful in
yes.
its defense mechanisms, and allowing us to just get through childhood before
Mhm.
maybe we had to start really facing this. And it's amazing. And they do know now, and I can't remember the exact way, but your body or your brain produces all kinds of chemicals to make you forget or to counteract. They say it's a life-threatening
Right.
moment.
Traumatic
Your brain
event.
releases all these
Yes.
chemicals during an assault, and then it releases things to counteract that because they know your heart could, you get a heart
Right.
attack even as a
Mm-hmm.
child. So it's also very biological what's
Hmm.
going on, you know.
It is.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, that's a really cool thing. And I love when we talk about these topics, because when I witnessed that murder, when it came back, as my counselor explained it, and this is layman's terms, I have not gone to school. I mean, I feel
Mhm.
like I have because I've been in counseling for
Yeah.
25 years. But you know what he said was traumatic events are actually housed and stored in a different part of your brain. And I know people have heard me say this before, but when you get to them, if you can get to
Mhm.
them, they actually are quite clear because they're stored in a different area. So they're not
Mm-hmm.
muddled with the area. You know, the funny thing is, you guys, in my book, I talk about getting this $20 bill out of my mom's purse and running down the street after the ice cream man. That
Mhm.
was this, I was the same age as when that murder happened. Not one person has said to me, I don't believe that ice cream story.
Right.
And
Right.
and not very many have really said about the murder, but I'm telling you, there are people who are like, well, I'm not really sure. How can you tell it? Well, I can tell it because my body, my visceral reactions to it. But isn't that funny, you guys, how
Yeah.
nobody questions that memory? But then when
Right.
you have
Mm-hmm.
this memory, why are traumatic memories? So for anybody listening, we get you, we understand you, trust your
Mhm.
memory and go with them so you can come back into yourself. But talk about that a little bit. It's funny how they debunk our bad memories, but we can have our good memories. What?
Well, or somebody, yeah, somebody across the street from me has had three bad auto accidents. She can't remember a single one. She has no memory.
Wow.
That's never questioned.
Mm-hmm.
That's never questioned, right?
Yeah, it's
It's
post-trauma
yes,
amnesia.
that's
Mm-hmm.
exactly right.
Exactly.
And
Exactly.
thank God for it. Because can you imagine, you
Mm-hmm.
guys? And
Yeah.
by the way, I do believe with all of my heart, our traumatic event never leaves us 100%. It just doesn't. It stays with
Mm-mm.
us. Like you saw the guy in the corner, Carol. You know,
Hmm.
I had this reoccurring dream of this woman that my dad shoved down and raped. I mean, it never leaves you completely. So the other thing I always tell people when they're trying to get to their memory is start with just what you have. Stop blocking it. Stop
Mm-hmm.
pushing it away and saying it's not true. Let
Hmm.
it come forward, because part of what we can do though as humans is tell our mind we're not going there, right? Like I
Mm-hmm.
talked to
Hmm.
this woman the other day and she said to me, I don't remember anything from 13 past, and I'm pretty sure there's sexual abuse there. I'm not going
Yeah.
there. What would you guys say
Mm-hmm.
to her about that?
I would say you are capable of facing it. I think people are
Mm,
terrified to face
Mm-hmm.
it. And I think it really doesn't come out until maybe your life is stable enough that you fully believe that
yes,
you can, you can
Mm-hmm.
face it
in
and
a
get
safe
through the
place.
emotion.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think people are terrified of the emotion, and I think,
Mhm,
you just have to have really good support and know that you can get to the other side.
mhm.
You got to go right through the fire.
You
Uh,
do.
yeah,
Yeah,
go
and I
right through
agree
the
with
flames.
I agree with you, Carol, about making sure you've done what you can to have support,
Yeah.
because I know
Mhm.
for me, I couldn't process everything that was coming back on my own. It was overwhelming
Yes.
Yes.
and
Oh, get a good counselor.
debilitating. Yeah.
Mhm.
And for me, it was actually really interesting how it all started to tumble out. And I was actually in acupuncture.
Go ahead
Hmm.
and
And
yeah, talk about it. No,
I don't know if
I think
you
it's
believe
wonderful.
acupuncture. I mean,
Yeah.
I do. I know
I do.
it
I've
works.
never had such a wonderful feeling in my body with acupuncture.
Really?
So I
It
was
didn't
in
take my
acupuncture. Sorry,
No,
sorry. Go
I
ahead,
think it's
Jody.
good because as people listen to us, my whole goal is to help them understand what the process of healing looks like, right?
Yes.
Because a lot of
Yeah.
people are out here just telling stories, but I want people to understand what the process looks like. So please tell us. I'll sit back
Okay,
and drink
so
my tea. I want
I'm
to hear.
lying on the acupuncture table with this wonderful acupuncturist. She's so kind. She's helping me with infertility because my reproductive system was
Hmm.
messed up for obvious reasons, right?
Right.
I had so much stress in my body that my system was not working properly, and she was helping me rebalance everything. So she put the needles into this part of your forearm, the inner part of your forearm, and they call it the inner gate. It's called the inner
Oh,
gate. And when those needles were in those spaces on both sides, she was spinning them, which is like a way to build the energy in them. And I just started crying, like deep weeping,
Wow.
sobbing, just crying and
Wow.
crying. And I couldn't move because I'm like on the table. And she's so kind. She's like, it's okay. This is the inner gate. Just let it out. And I'm just sobbing and sobbing and sobbing. She just
Mhm.
let me cry. And I was like, I think I need to go to therapy. Like I realized as I'm lying
Wow.
there on the table, just having this energy move through my body, it was almost like releasing that the nervous system tangle and bundle that I'd been locking everything down in my
Mhm.
brain.
Mhm.
And it was a powerful moment. And then her advice to me, and who knows her story, right? But her
Right.
advice to me was seek a counselor who's older and who specializes in trauma, because you need someone who's
Mhm.
mature enough to handle
Yes.
whatever your story is.
yeah,
She
that's
didn't
true.
even know what my story was, but she could tell how deep it was and
Right.
how suppressed it was. So it was a, a good moment, but also scary for me because I didn't know what was coming. I
Yeah.
didn't know how much work I had to do, but I could tell it was a lot, obviously. And so I did. I went on to psychologytoday.com and I
Mhm.
sought an older female therapist who had experience in trauma and sexual abuse. And
Mhm.
she was a good landing place for me. And I'm glad for that advice because I've heard stories of people who have sought therapists who say, I can't handle your story, like you're
Oh,
too much. And then,
I've been fired by therapists.
yeah, and then that is only re traumatizing and re
Right.
Yeah.
stigmatizing.
Two times I was told I'm not qualified to handle you.
Right.
Yeah.
Mm.
Which, you
That
know, in some ways is responsible, but
it is.
also
That's how I looked at it.
really
Yeah,
difficult for
it is.
the person seeking help.
Even
So,
scarier. Yeah.
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 When your therapist can't handle it.
Right.
And like I wrote about in my book, I knew something was horribly wrong with me. I just had no idea what it was because the trauma was just circling my head. And I went to many therapists who just had no idea that this is how sexual abuse can look. But yeah,
Wow.
I found an older man
Mm.
um, was recommended to me, and he was an absolute godsend. I mean,
Now, Carol, how did your first memories come back? So, see, it's like that sliver. I knew something was wrong with me. It was starting to
yeah,
get infected, but I couldn't find the sliver.
isn't that you
It's
look back on it
normal.
now and you're like, how did I not see
I
this?
know. I
But
know.
of course, I had no memory of it at all. Um, but things were building. Things were building, and one of the big things was my father told my daughter in front of me that he'd be accused of molesting her, my 4-year-old, if she slept with him. She wanted to sleep in his bed.
Mm,
And I just could never put it back in after that. But there
Mm.
have been a lot of
mhm,
things I felt like I was just losing my mind.
mhm.
And it's terrifying, but it's also terrifying to try to hold this all in.
Well, it
Mhm.
is
Right?
because I remember you talking about this man, this shadow that
Yes,
followed you all the time.
yes.
When you have those reoccurrences in life,
Hmm.
those are flashbacks that are coming back, right? Like
Hmm.
when you learn what your brain's doing, it's saying to you, but you don't know. Like I
I
used
didn't know
to,
what it was.
I didn't know. I always thought this woman's spirit was like hunting me because her murder was unsolved. So I was terrified that, somehow her spirit's roaming the earth and coming and getting me. And then my counselor would say, Jody, tell me where you saw that woman. And I'd say, oh, she's walking up to me when I'm sitting in that white chair. And all of a sudden, I understood, instead of being terrified by my mind, I understood the gift that it was trying to give back to me. It was
Yes.
Mhm.
because you know that it actually takes parts of our brain to suppress things. So
Mhm.
we're not using the full
Mm.
capacity of our brain because we're repressing, we're repressing, we're repressing.
Mhm.
And that now that actually takes mind power, so that we're exhausted, we're
Yep.
confused, it's
Mhm.
complicated, we're not
Depressed.
ourselves, we're depressed, right?
Mhm.
Because
Mhm.
we're spending all this time shoving stuff down that we don't even understand why, or having these mental returns that are valid and honest and real, but we don't know what the fuck's going on,
No,
right?
we have no
Mhm.
idea. If
Right.
I got in any kind of a locked in place like airplanes or any kind of ride, any I don't know, dark places, I was like
Mhm.
total trauma to me, and I just cry and cry and cry. I had no idea,
And it makes you
what
feel crazy because you're
yeah, oh
having this
yeah,
strong reaction, and you're like,
right.
I remember one time this pastor said to me, Jody, if you can't believe the memories, believe what your body's telling you. And that was a
Mm,
really wise thing, because I would
Mhm.
have physical pain in my vaginal area.
yeah.
I'd had all these other symptoms. It wasn't just what my mind saw. My body, now we know, of course, the body keeps the score, but I started
Hmm.
healing a long time ago before all of this happened. And my journey took me a good 25 years. I think I'm going to heal until I die. That's just my opinion,
Me
because,
too.
it's just,
Me too.
I mean, I don't believe there's this place of nirvana. And I know a lot of people, particularly people that, have this religious bend, that you're just healed and boom,
Hmm.
God takes it all away. I think God says to me, no matter what happens next, Jody, no matter my dreams have subsided, thank God. But
Hmm.
like, I'm having this surgery, you guys. And so to go to a physical therapy
You
appointment.
are for
Oh,
your hip.
I am on Monday. I go in, and so I went to this PT. I'm just giving you an
Mm.
example of how God cannot just remove our experiences in life. And
Mhm.
so I walk in there, and my father, when I was still in the small house, you guys. So I turned
Mm.
4 out of that house. He broke his leg, and he was in a wheelchair. Well, he raped me in that real wheelchair, and I was terrified as a little girl of that wheelchair.
Mm.
And so I had to fight not only the fear of this surgery, I can still feel it, because I don't talk about these things
Mhm.
very much, because
Mm.
it's just
Mm.
the stuff that we have to deal with, right? And so
Yeah.
Mhm.
when I'm
Mhm.
walking in there, I'm just getting that fog of
Sure.
PTSD, and I need to stay present, but I want to run, and everything's terrifying me. But then when I see the new walkers, they don't look old school, and it
Hmm.
started calming me down. So without going further into that, you can't just pluck that out of your being. Like, I have
No.
healed, I
Mm-mm.
have done the right things. I still do the right things as much as I
Mhm.
can. I drink wine to calm down too, and I think that's okay.
Mm.
But you know what I mean, you guys, that our bodies return to us what our mind cannot. That's what I'm trying to say.
Hmm. Right. And it'd be really nice if you could share that with somebody in that, situation of,
Right.
you know,
My daughter called that night, and I talked, and when I heard her voice, I talked it through, and I just burst into tears, because I'd been
yeah.
holding
Mhm.
that in all day. And I would encourage people to do that. Carol, thank you so
Well,
much for that. It
yeah, and
is.
actually, I work in medical care. I work in rehab, and
Oh,
Oh, that's right.
everyone, everyone is so in my building, if we know that someone's come through trauma,
Oh, that's
the
cool.
doctors alert everyone. They respect the person.
See, and
yeah.
Like
that's
there's so much
beautiful.
awareness in the medical community, at least in my experience, of the reality of that for people. And, okay, this patient needs these things to feel safe, and this
Mm.
patient needs these things. But it does take having that conversation with someone. And
And
on my
see, and
team, we have a
I hate saying
psychologist.
that.
Oh, in our team, we have a psychologist, and the psychologist will, speak with the patient, but it's for me, it's an inpatient
Hmm.
setting. But
Okay.
I just want to reassure you, Jody, and anyone else who's listening,
Yeah, that's neat. I
there
love.
is professional training around it and education more and more on the importance of emotional safety for people and
You
the
know,
connection
that's a
between
cool
emotions and physical.
Right. That's a
Mhm.
cool thing, Emily. And a lot of people do listen to this. And I want you to say, I can't even imagine going in there. Of course, I'm not going to say my dad raped me in a wheelchair, and so I'm scared of these things that look like that.
Well,
I'm
you can
not
But
say
going
I
to
had
say,
sexual
you
trauma
yeah.
around
right.
it.
Yeah, you
I
don't
mean,
you could just say what is difficult for you and what you think might be
right,
easier. You don't have to tell the whole story.
right.
Yeah.
That's how we frame it. Like
That's
when
a
we're in our
wonderful
care
thing to
team
say.
conferences, the psychologist will say, okay, everyone, for this patient, they need the door open. They want to
Yeah.
be on
Oh, that's
near the door. They want
cool.
you inside the room and them at the door. They need a room with a window.
Oh, I
This
love that.
person can't have you wear this color. Like, whatever it
Isn't that
is.
something? That's just a miracle of
It
healing.
is a
In
miracle.
2024, it
Mhm,
really shows that there have been major advances in
mhm,
this. I wanted to say too, like dark clothes thing. I can be very claustrophobic from the abuse.
mhm.
Going into an MRI machine, I would just
Mhm.
weep. I just
Mhm.
See that, right? Because
weep.
it probably gave you that same sensation of having
Yeah,
your
you're
father
locked
on you.
in, it's
Yes.
dark, you can't
Right.
move. Now, I mean, now I do the open ones, not that they're a whole lot better, but I did tell the therapist, I said I'm crying because it triggers me.
Mhm.
And he was good about it. I also think we should warn women when you go in to deliver a baby.
Yes.
Mhm.
I went in and had no idea my background. Of course, my father's a physician too, and the whole medical thing is like,
Hmm.
click, click,
Mhm.
click.
Mhm.
Yes.
Um, but it was, extremely traumatic, and I just
Mhm.
cried and cried and cried afterwards. And I have heard now that obstetric nurses are aware of this. There is
Hmm.
some training in
Hmm.
this
Mhm.
that sexual abuse victims coming through can have a very hard time.
Mhm.
Or this postpartum depression, how much of that is from
Hmm.
women who've
Right.
had,
Right.
trauma,
Right.
so sexual trauma. So,
I love where our conversations go because see,
mhm.
this is what a beautiful thing because it's huge, you guys. What people don't understand is whether you go back to your memories or you don't, you're going to live them. They're living with you anyway.
Yes,
Mhm.
they're going to
And
be
so
with
they're
you.
with you. And so
Yes.
I love that Carol said you have the courage, and Emily agreed, because even if you don't go back to them, they are walking into that chamber
Mm,
with you that's going to terrify you, these hidden fears that you have, these
yes.
phobias. They get better. They certainly get
Hmm.
better. But you can't extinguish that flame all the time. But I do think we get better by going back. And I love
Yeah.
this conversation because you're right. In childbirth and all that, we didn't talk about that, Emily, years
Mm-mm.
ago. My daughter
Mhm.
she's going to be 40, and 40 years ago, nobody's telling us, watch
Nobody.
out, this is
Mm.
going to freak you out. And my mind was just freaked out, and I just got through it until
You
I
just get
wasn't
through
freaked
it.
out. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and what I think is good is that, being part of the care team, obviously I'm well acquainted with all of it personally, but
Mhm.
there is no sense of shame or any looking down on the person who has those needs, if that makes sense. So
Good. Yeah.
there's not a stigma about it. And I hope that's empowering to anyone
Right.
who is carrying those things, that there is a possibility of being cared for in a way of dignity and compassion and
Yeah.
respect towards you,
Hmm.
and that hopefully if you have shame, that will help free you from shame. Like there is no shame in these things.
Right. See,
Yeah.
that's
Mhm.
beautiful. But Carol, well, you're going into this MRI, and don't you
Hmm.
feel though like broken and weak, and you have to say
Yes.
it so he doesn't know?
Embarrassed.
Embarrassed. It's
I'm
embarrassing.
embarrassed.
I
Yeah.
don't want to use that word, but I'm always embarrassed of my weakness around that. It's
Mm.
hard, Emily, to be I want
Yeah.
to I'm very vulnerable here because my
Mhm.
heart has a goal to help the listener that can't get out of the
Hmm.
chair, that won't go and tell somebody. So I want to be vulnerable here. In my real
Sure.
life, I'm not this vulnerable. And I don't care who finds me, I'm going to use that vulnerability to help other people. but I hate being weak, you guys. Like this hip surgery,
Yes.
to walk with
Mm.
going forward and I can't walk right. And that vulnerability, it makes me feel like a bird's going to come out of the air and pluck me off or something. Does that make
Mm.
sense? It
Hmm.
seems silly. Carol,
It
talk about
does.
that for
But
a minute.
yeah, or you're professional people and you can
Right.
handle a whole lot, and then you become really this lost child very
Eggs
easily.
that
Just
Mm.
the
fast, that
slightest
fast.
thing,
That those
slightest thing,
triggers
But
can move us into that. Yes.
and
Mhm.
I think the real goal with this memory is you have to drain the emotion out of them as
Yes.
best you can, because the truth is what happened. We would have trauma and it was just put in, it's called the amygdala is the part of the brain.
Amygdala? Is it amygdala?
Amygdala, thank you. Amygdala is where these memories go, but they're completely unprocessed. None of the
Yes.
emotion has come out,
Yes.
the terror, everything, and they're
Yes.
stuffed in there. And I think when they start coming out, that's the goal of the brain, is to get as much out of it as you
Mm.
can,
And
and to
see,
do it,
yeah, keep
yeah.
going. Nope, keep
No,
going.
and I think to do it physically. I've said this before. I've learned, you need to cry, you need to
Mhm.
pound, you need to yell
Yes.
out the anger. You physically try to get this out of you, and be as hysterical as you can, because you're going to feel a lot better,
Mhm.
once you really
Mhm.
work it through.
Well, and I think people look at going back in their mind as misery, as a punishment. And
Yeah.
to me, it's a gift because all those
Mhm.
visceral reactions now are unbound, untangled, and they go out of my being.
Yes.
So when I talk
Yes.
about triggers today, trust me, those triggers do not drop me to my knees. They don't give me a panic attack where I feel like I'm going to pass out.
Yeah.
They're weakened. I cannot say though that I'm not going to have them again. That
Right.
I
Mhm.
have a
Right.
reality that says this is my past and you know what I mean though, but I'm a grandmother and I'm full of love and my babies love me and my life is full, but I cannot know when I'm going to be triggered. And that's just part of
Yeah.
it.
Mhm.
But I'll tell you,
Mhm.
even if you keep it hidden, I'm curious to hear if you agree with this. Even if you keep it hidden, don't you think triggers exist?
Oh,
I think
absolutely.
so.
Hmm. I
Mhm.
think of it like a balloon full of air. Before we've dealt with it, it's full of all this air, and you get
Mhm.
almost all the air out, but the balloon's still there. It's always going to be there.
Mhm.
But yeah, I don't know. I think that's the big piece for me, was I never knew what the triggers were.
Mm.
Where you're just suddenly hit with this. And I had no idea what it was, and trying to keep people from knowing I was really crazy. Like I
Right?
was sure I
Mm.
was really crazy.
But
And,
when the
I
memory
was
returns,
covering that up.
yes, but when the
Mhm.
memory returns, Carol, doesn't it feel though like the missing piece of the puzzle?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
it gives you so much peace.
It
And
does.
oh
All of a
my
sudden,
gosh.
you know yourself. And it was like the
Hmm.
murder because all of my life I knew there was this motel room my father and Craig had taken me to. It's weird to say that that kind of horrifying trauma, and you guys, I was terrified many times after that memory returned because I'd wake up with horrible dreams with this
Oh, I
woman at my
bet.
Mhm.
feet. But I have to tell you at the same time, it's weird that you just said the word peace. I was finding Jody. Do you know how important that
Mhm.
was to
Hmm.
Mhm.
know who I was? I
Right.
was loving myself, right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
I love that
That's
you just said
amazing.
that.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
I
you
was
figure
actually,
out who you are. Yeah. Excuse me.
oh, that's okay. I was thinking about that, Jody, when you were talking about all the emotions. I feel like expressing those emotions and letting them all come through is like giving an ear and an audience and validation
Yes.
to what actually was happening to me
Mhm.
at the
Hmm.
time when I was just dissociated, silent,
Mhm. Mhm.
frozen,
Yep.
fawning to my parents, all of the ways I was surviving and pushing aside the terror
Mhm.
because I had no other choice at that time.
Hmm.
And then to be able to actually express everything and acknowledge the horror of it and acknowledge and allow myself to feel
Mhm.
what was the appropriate emotion and to
Yes.
have the ability to meet myself, like that part of myself that was just never cared for and kept deep
Mhm.
down because I was taught to just stuff it all, and then to let it all come through
Right.
is, I remember my therapist saying, you're doing your next step is integration. And I remember saying, I don't want to integrate this. It's too awful.
Right.
I don't want this to be part of me. This is too
Oh
awful.
my
And
God,
I
that's
remember
so
saying
true.
that to her. And she was so patient. She just let me be in that perspective. And then the next week I came back and I remember starting to have a glimpse and a feeling of incorporating my true past in a way that allowed me to be connected to myself
That's
because
Yeah.
I'd always
beautiful.
been disconnected before.
Hmm.
So I think that allowing the emotions is loving yourself. That's just
That's
like you
true.
said, Jody.
And I think
100%.
I felt like, it was like I was right all along. Something
Yes.
Hmm.
horrible had happened, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, you're just you kind of get back to yourself that I should have trusted myself that I did
Mhm.
know something crazy was going on
Hmm.
and growing
And I
up.
really wasn't safe. I wasn't safe.
Yeah, we weren't safe. It was
We weren't
absolutely
safe, which, by the
absolutely
way,
terrifying.
right, is a perfect segue into let's talk about love in these families because
Mhm.
everything that we just talked about was no dictation of a loving home. A
Right.
loving home would not create denial. A loving home would not make you block memories to come to the dinner table. A loving
Right.
home
Mm.
would not make you disassociate with yourself, by the way. So,
Mhm.
when we talk about this, I thought it would be interesting if we talked about what we believed love was. So, if each one of you would just take time to tell me how, when you look at your child, embrace love and tell me what love means. Go ahead, Emily, and start with how you see love in your life today.
Today with like my child now,
Mhm.
well, I feel like I'm just discovering who she is. Like I'm amazed at how I believe God has made her. I think she's unfolding and I'm here to be with her in that process and support her and provide for her needs. And in terms of love, um I want her to know that I love her no matter what, and she doesn't have to perform anything. Like, I'm not the type of mom that wants to dress her a certain way to present her to the world. It's like, you go choose your clothes. If you're all covered and you meet the school dress code and it's appropriate to the weather, you be you. Like, uh, I don't want to force her into anything that she's not. Like, she needs to follow certain expectations, like be to school on time and you need to do this chore every week because I want to teach her responsibility and all that. But I I just think overall I delight in her and I want I want to be a supportive, present, safe, open, caring person for her. Hmm.
How old is she now?
She's 7.
7.
That's
That's 6.
Hmm.
beautiful. All right, Carol,
Mhm.
you tell me, looking at your daughter, I know you have a grown daughter.
Yeah, and son. Yeah.
Yeah, and a son,
Um,
right. So
yeah,
both of your children, just what what
right.
what is love today for you?
I think, let me preface it by saying, um, we've talked briefly about this before, and you guys already made me really think differently about it. Thank you for that. But yeah, I think it's that when they express who they are and say what they're feeling, that they are loved and
Hmm.
valued for that. yeah, that I love them for who they actually are, not who they're, thinking they have to be or holding it all in, that they can express the really hard things in
Mhm.
life and hard
Yes.
things in relationships. And I think, yeah, that's really loving somebody, is really allowing them to be who they are within reason. And
Right.
yeah, guiding them. I'm not in the guiding part of it anymore
Right.
so
No,
much.
neither am I. Exactly.
Yeah, I
Because,
mean, we'd like to be, but
right. They'll call, well, they'll call when they need something, right?
right, right.
But I think what's
Mhm.
interesting
How
is
about you?
well,
Hmm.
the entire conversation that we had up until this point had none of the notes and qualities that you guys just talked about. And so
Hmm.
I think we talk about love is complicated in families of incest, but it's really not when you compare it to what real
Hmm.
love is. And I assure anybody who's listening that these beautiful women did not find this in the homes they came from. They created this from their families and the people that
Yeah.
loved them and a caring God and all these things. But I think we are at time, but this has been just a beautiful conversation. But I think to take the complication out, really, it's like being with an abusive man or whatever.
Hmm.
You guys both said, I want my children to be who they are. You guys both talked about this excitement to explore who your children were. In homes of incest, nobody cares who we are. They
Nobody
don't want to
cares.
know what's in our mind because they teach us to not go into our
Hmm.
minds. So it's the very opposite of what love really does. So it's really
Hmm.
not that complicated. When someone tells you to deny who you are and to deny who the family is,
Mhm.
but show up and look good, it's curb appeal, right, Carol?
Curb appeal, right? But yeah, Jody, I think that's really, really brilliant. That it's a totally different thing and it's a simple thing and
It
we don't
is.
make it simple.
Right.
But can you imagine asking your child to walk around terrified,
No.
absolutely terrified, but don't say anything?
Mm.
You're not free to discuss
Right.
what you're feeling. I mean, I can't even
No,
imagine.
and now that I hear you say it like that, I see how I was so controlled by my parents that I
Mhm.
thought that was normal, that I thought
Right.
that's
I
what I
did
had
too.
to do
So did I.
to honor them
Mhm.
and to obey my parents, and I
Hmm.
thought that I was doing right by
Mhm.
doing that. And then when I actually hear it spoken, I think that is just so wrong, so
Hmm.
cruel
Mhm.
and awful. Yeah.
Hmm.
Well,
Mm.
and it goes back to be the best person that we can be today, we have to be bad daughters. It seems so
Yeah.
weird, but you know what
Yeah.
I mean?
Yeah.
I always say I had to be a
Right.
bad kid to start healing because we really want to
Mhm.
be a good daughter and we were good daughters. We did everything they told us to do to our detriment, to our
Hmm.
deep detriment. I don't do that
Mhm.
anymore. And I don't care what you
We
think
don't
about me.
play the
It's none of
game.
my bit. We don't play the game anymore. But
Yeah.
doesn't it is kind of true that you have to become a bad kid
Yeah.
to start
Yeah.
healing, right? Does that make sense?
Well,
Or
it's
you're
because you
not
have to be.
obeying, you're not obeying
Right.
anymore. You're not playing the
You're not playing the
rules
game.
of the game.
That's right.
Mhm.
Right. And
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 family doesn't like that, do they?
no,
No,
no, they
no.
do not like that at all. But that's, I've had one of my nieces and nephews here over the weekend, and I talked to her about this. I said, you know, I just had to end this in our family. I
Mhm.
Yes.
just had to put an end
Yes.
to it. It's just going to go generation after generation if we don't speak up and take action. It's
Mhm.
not just speaking because
That's
people
right.
poo-poo it and put it away. It's taking real action that can be so painful, but so important.
Right. Oh, there's a cost to it for sure, because
The cost.
again, as we started this, the prince of the power of this air, darkness, does not want this to come out because he's killing millions of people with it. Why would, you know what I mean? Because there's no
Hmm.
other reason, you guys. I wanted to read it. That just reminds me, I want to read this real quick. There was the False Memory Foundation, and I know, Carol,
Yes.
you'll know it. It was
Yes,
started
I
in
got letters about it.
Oh, my father
Art,
was a member. It was a pedophile who created it. But this
yes.
in Wikipedia, if you look it up, they are now defunct. But you know what Stanton says? He states, rarely has such a strange and little understood organization had such a profound effect on media coverage of such a controversial matter. But now listen, the media gave more coverage to the pedophiles
Mhm.
than to the victims. And the
Oh,
victim
I
of
think she
that,
froze. Oh, there we go.
oh, am I unfrozen?
No, you're
Yeah,
good.
now
You're
you're
good.
okay. Now
Okay.
you're okay.
So the victim of that pedophile was actually a professor in the University of I think it was Portland or the state of Oregon.
The daughter?
The daughter was, yes, and
Oh,
I
okay.
happened to live in Oregon at the time.
Yeah.
And you guys, you could not believe that it was national attention for this
Yes.
false memory foundation. And when you research the women that actually like these, oh, they get experts on, they were hired guns. I've been in law for
Mhm.
years. We call them hired guns. You pay people to
Really?
come on and say, oh, false memory. Oh, yep, yep, yep.
Mm.
Well, this other lady came out, Mary Knight, actually, and she's done some really great work. If you guys want to look her up on YouTube, she's done really great work. Came through a lot of stuff. She believes she witnessed a murder. These people are really dark. But she interviews the person who was the expert for this false memory syndrome. And she's a
Mhm.
complete sham, you guys. She has
Really?
absolutely credential, not one. And yet, this is what I just want to say to the listener. It is not God who's telling you to be quiet because it
Mm-mm.
is the darkness of
Yeah.
this world that wants to keep people in shame. It's taking millions of life. Don't be one of those millions. So, you guys,
Yes.
anyway, I wanted to just end with that because it's such a profound thing that, like he said, it's this weird little organization that pedophiles had to
Yeah.
pay to become a part of, and they get national attention. Here we
And
are doing our best, right, you guys, to just get a little attention for people that are
truth.
surviving these crimes.
Yeah.
Go ahead,
My
Carol.
father sent me letters. Yeah. I heard
Oh,
all about it
yep. My
because
dad
it
did
was
too.
when women started talking about it.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
And that
And I know we're
foundation
over
got,
time.
no, it's okay, but that foundation got
So much press.
it's just crazy to me. And the reason I wanted to bring that up is because when we listen, if we make it simple as darkness doesn't want you to talk, but God does, that
Mhm.
gives you
Mm-hmm.
this green light to go. You know what I mean? Because
Yeah.
there's all this pushback on it that, oh, this is just messy and ugly and don't bring it out. And you should just, quit talking about people look at me
Forgive
actually.
and move on.
I know, right? People look at me in my
Well,
community and say, and it's okay if we talk a little bit more. They look at me and they're like, oh, coming from what you came from. Like and I want to say, I'm a badass. I could run circles around
right.
you in life.
Yeah, really?
Well, and I also think that it helps guide, like if you start to disclose something and someone responds in a way that is wanting you to stop or to be quiet, that they're not respecting you, they're not listening, they're
Mhm.
not open and healthy, I would say, in their response, then don't keep going with that relationship
No.
because that is not
Amen.
going to help you in your healing.
Mhm.
No,
Yeah.
surround yourself with supportive people. And
Yeah.
Mhm.
and then we are trying to educate you on the experience of it because I don't care how many counselors have what degrees and have studied
Mhm.
trauma, you still don't understand what it feels like in your body. And I think the man that wrote the body, keeps the score has
Yeah.
done remarkable strides, and I thank him with everything in me.
Mhm.
And maybe he did come through trauma, but experience speaks louder than anything in life. And so listening to us, that is our goal, that you understand that we get it, that just talking through these experiences, ladies, we can see the commonality. It works
Yes.
the same in lives, right?
Mhm.
It really
And
does.
we're at different places too. I mean, Emily,
Totally different
you're a little
places.
newer in the journey, and Jody and I've been through this for a long time.
Mhm.
Long
Mhm.
time.
And I
So
love that you brought up how much support there is in the community because we wouldn't have talked to our doctor about trauma. You know what I mean?
no. Oh, heck no.
So
But
Freud.
I
have
do
you
now. I tell the doctor now I'm a
That's
Mhm.
cool.
trauma
Good for
survivor,
you.
and they kind of look
Mhm.
at you funny, but they should
Well,
know.
adverse childhood experiences, the study from
Yes. Yes.
Kaiser,
Yep.
that
ACEs.
has
Yeah.
informed so much of the next generation of medical
Good.
practitioners.
Mhm.
So, yeah.
Well,
That's
and
wonderful.
that study, just so in case you're listening and you don't know what the ACEs study is, they actually, Kaiser wanted to find out how they could save money. And so they started doing this study
Really?
about where's the basic, you know, thrust of the problem. And it came out childhood trauma is honestly,
Right.
and do you know what the government did with that study? Absolutely nothing. Not
Mm.
really. I mean, the community's done some things like Emily says, but truly, when you have that kind of a study and it comes out and says, you know what, one of the biggest problems we face is childhood trauma. But what
Yes.
do we really do to they throw what $350 million at it? I mean, because I was just reading, you know, it's April's National Awareness for, and thank you for that. To me, every day of my life is Awareness
Right.
Day. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like,
really.
I mean, I looked that up and so I actually researched it kind of before we met today. And I thought, what are you doing? So every state has a National Awareness Day. What does that mean? I didn't even know it existed. I didn't know that these twirly things that are blue represented childhood abuse in the month of
I didn't
April.
either.
And I'm an advocate and I've done work for years because all of that just makes somebody tick a box and say, I feel good now
Right.
because we have a month. We have a pretzel day too on Friday. You know what I mean? And I really did read that the other day. It's goofiness, but that ACEs study is fascinating. And you know, and that's exactly why they did that, to try to mitigate damage for Kaiser. And so it came up that the biggest problem was childhood trauma.
Which
What's done
is, so
with
it's
it?
incredibly, think of the billions of dollars, you know,
Right.
we pay
Yeah.
because of trauma. So,
Depressant medicines and all these things. Yes.
yeah,
Yes. But
you know, it's a fortune, and they're trying to screen children. Wasn't it used to screen children um, for how much, what they could expect as adults in healthcare costs?
I'm not sure.
yes, I
Yeah,
mean,
I
it
think
was,
it has been used for that.
again, though, to save money, it's not about the life of a
Yeah,
human
yeah,
being.
really. But I do know a professor who is on the panel that's trying to update those and make those more predictive of the health costs of child abuse, childhood trauma.
And, you know, we'll take any help we can get, right? If it wants to
Yeah.
be to mitigate
Yeah.
the damage monetarily, so be it. I mean, whatever helps people, right? But I do believe that what we do works. And, you know, when our Vietnam vets came back from the war, they gave them all of this medicine. That's actually where we got the term PTSD, was from
Yes.
our wonderful men that went over there and fought. And you know what they found out that helped the most, you guys? Was talking one to another. So they started these support groups, and that's where support groups came from. And so these vets were actually getting better
Interesting.
by going to these groups. You
Yeah.
can look it
Yeah.
up. That's actually a true thing. And it helped them more than anything else helped them. And those guys went through so much. I have a really good friend here that actually did 4 tours. And I talked to him a lot because trauma resonates in a human soul the same way.
Yeah.
And he has a lot of trauma. So we're buddies. You know what I mean? Over
Yeah.
call it a trauma bond. I'm good with it because a lot of people don't understand that when, you know, when you
Yeah.
don't come from trauma. So anyway, ladies, it's been so beautiful. And I just
Okay.
wanted us to continue to talk. I'm going to be off for a couple weeks, just healing from the surgery, but they tell me it's a pretty quick recovery.
For
I
a
love you
hip.
guys. Yes, for a hip. Yeah, actually, you walk out.
Best of
Wow.
luck. I hope it
Thank
goes
you.
great. I've heard really good.
After you stop recording, do you mind staying on for just a second?
No, let's hit stop.
So, starting